Hello, welcome to Psychological Insights. I'm Dave Gideon, and here is Dr. Robert Hamm. How are you doing today, Doc?
Oh, good. How about yourself?
Not too bad.
Okay. Today we're going to talk about a topic that I recently wrote about in my blog. It's called the Pontius Pilate dilemma. It's an idea that was inspired by my work in my practice. I'm a psychologist in private practice here in the town of West Hartford. And some of my patients deal with issues that inspired this idea that we're going to talk about today.
Okay.
Yeah.
In general, though, the idea of the Pontius Pilate dilemma, is that something to do with letting go? I mean, the idea of letting go of the past and moving forward with the life?
Yeah, well, it could be letting go of anything in general, but it's an idea that I had first come up with when I was in my doctoral program many years ago, and the topic of my dissertation was on willingness to accept limitations. And some people would come up to me and ask me, well, is that a good thing to accept limitations? Maybe we should push the envelope and try to see what we're able to achieve in life. Isn't accepting limitations sort of a resignation of sorts? And to some degree that's true, but there comes a point when there are situations in life when it becomes problematic, when we continue to push and push and it isn't producing the results that we had hoped. Letting go is an issue that many people have, especially as we get older. Some of my older patients past midlife, dealing with their own limitations in their lives as they get older, and garnering the wisdom to deal with those situations emotionally includes confronting what we have very little control over in our lives and coming to terms with those things in life. So that's what I mean by letting go. It's letting go of things. It could be of anything. It's a general sort of reference point, but it was inspired, as I said, by my early work in graduate school, and I have found it particularly relevant in my practice working with patients, especially patients who are midlife and older. Something that he had no control over.
Right.
It didn't mean he was a bad person, that he didn't mean that he himself was limited, but rather the circumstances prevented him from being able to affect a change as he had hoped.
Right.
And I thought an analogy with Pontius Pilate, that perhaps the story, our interpretation, has sort of slanted it in a different direction than perhaps what this judge may have experienced. In other words, he may have realized that he was up against a situation that he couldn't win.
Right.
That if he had made a decision to exonerate Jesus, that it would have been overruled anyway. Because of the pressures that was bore on him by the powers that be at those times in history. So I find this as an issue, problems in letting go with some of my patients, and this analogy to Pontius Pilate may be a way to help them to see that analogy and relate to it. Something that would help them to, for it to come to mind in a deeper way. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking as you were talking about internalizing the guilt and shame, of daily living. It just builds up over time, and somehow that kind of comes out in our everyday lives, and we're not even aware of it. Have you experienced a lot of that with your patients? The guilt being like so deep down inside that it's hard for them to identify?
Yeah, some of my patients, they feel that they just are not up to all that is required of them, and blame themselves unnecessarily. Yes. So letting go, which is not an easy thing to achieve, entails the ability to look at oneself and establish a more accepting relationship with ourselves, dealing with the stresses of life, that we, even if we give our best, it's not always sufficient to bring about change as we had hoped. And that letting go of that is can be a very freeing experience, alleviating anxiety. But it's not difficult. You have to establish a feeling, a sense of compassion in accepting
there you go,
the limits of what you're able to do, what we, as a human race can do about our problems. We can only do our best.
Yeah.
And that comes from, searching within ourselves, and our conscience, whether we are doing our best. A lot of people who do their best still struggle with this because they feel that even though they're giving their best, that they should do more.
Coming to acceptance is no small feat by any means. It takes years of practice, I guess.
Yes.
And it's always coming up again and again, and there's always some conflict that one has to compromise with themselves, As far as accepting it, it's almost, sometimes for me, speaking personally, acceptance seems like something I can't even begin to conquer. And it's not about conquering, though, is it? It's just about being all right with yourself in the moment.
Yes, it is. It's a matter of establishing a sense of compassion and acceptance. So if there are issues that we have with ourselves that we feel that we're not good enough, whether it was how we were raised, or dealing with changes in our life. What we could do at one time, we can't do anymore. And that's why I say people who are older often confront these things, that our health is not as good, we don't have the same energy we used to, or let's say our financial situations have declined for one reason or another. It's hard to come to terms with that. And what might have been at one time something that we took for granted comes to the surface when those limitations present themselves. And to let go of those expectations and to feel a sense of peace about that is a challenge, and that's the work that I do with my patients in helping them to come to terms with that. And this dilemma, the Pontius Pilate dilemma, may be an analogy that can help them with that.
The circumstances, of course, are an ongoing thing. There's always something as change. Change comes about. Change can be for the good or for the worse sometimes. And adapting, the whole idea of being able to adapt is a life lesson.
In my practice, I see people who are ready to open up, and that's why they're there. But I'm sure that many people should seek help or find someone to confide in to help them if they're struggling with it and they don't know a way to get through that. They just hold it in. So, the symptoms that many people have who struggle with these things, of course, are anxiety disorders and insomnia, and it does take its toll. And depression,
Yes, depression.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, depression
Yes.
and anxiety, like two opposite ends of the spectrum of,
Yes.
you know, in psychology.
So if you don't feel that you're meeting your expectations, if you have difficulty letting go, I mean, it becomes like a burden that just weighs on you, becomes deeper and deeper, and that can lead to depression.
Mm-hmm.
Because depression is, the psychological correlate to depression is a feeling of helplessness. I can't do anything about it.
Yes.
And if you feel that you should, then you become so hard on yourself that you become discouraged and feel self-defeated.
Mm.
So letting go enables people to free themselves to feel a sense of acceptance and peace, and alleviates many of those symptoms that they suffer from.
Mm-hmm. So acceptance would be like the answer to all my problems, in other words, if I could just get a hold of that.
That's right, and some people struggle with that all their lives. It's not so simple. I mean, life is hard in and of itself, isn't it? Dealing with all of the challenges, and then if you have a difficult relationship with yourself, you feel that you're not sufficient to deal with things, that you're very harsh on yourself, it makes it that much more challenging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's what I do, and the work that I do as a psychotherapist, to help people to realize that life is challenges, and it's our attitudes about it and our relationship with ourselves that enables us to deal with those challenges as best as we possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Some sort of balance in life. Seeking out balance. I mean, we can't have perfection. Perfectionism isn't going to work. Trying to achieve some balance. Would you have any advice for people that are trying to find balance in their lives and they just don't know how to reach for it, or even begin to start?
Well, I would call it perspective. To come to the realization in our lives that we're limited in what we can do, and what we can do is, as long as we give it our best, is good enough. And to come to peace with that realization helps people to be able to live their lives in a more meaningful way without the stresses and the symptoms that often they suffer from, that bring them to see me.
Mm.
You don't have to try to change the things that you don't have control over, and you can focus instead on what you can do.
So it's the idea of letting go and then moving on beyond the letting go process, frees one's life up for new experiences, and trying to develop that formula that I can do this, I can let go, I can move on. But what comes next?
What really matters is how you confront those shoes. Whether you accept the fact that there are going to be challenges, and you are going to do your best to use your resources to confront them as best you can, and accept that what you can do about those situations is limited, that there are a lot of things in life that we don't have control. There's a sense of relief that comes with that, a sense of peace in accepting that. And that empowers people, gives them a greater sense of power to deal with problems in life, realizing that even if the shoes are going to fall, that you're at peace with yourself, that you're going to give it your best, and that's all that you need to do.
That takes a lot of confidence building too. I mean, it's not all that is as simple as one would hope it would be. I mean, life is complicated. People are complicated. They deal with complicated people and complicated situations. And what comes of all that? I mean, sometimes that depression, you can almost feel it settling in.
Whenever you face a challenge in life, you're going to be confronted not just with the challenge itself, but it also causes you to face yourself and what tools you have within yourself, what resources that you have. And that's what psychotherapy gives you, to confront those situations with a greater sense of wisdom and self-acceptance, so that you can give your best and not add on to it a lot of unrealistic expectations that cause a lot of self-blame, unnecessary self-blame, and a lot of anguish that is wasted energy because there's nothing you can do about situations about which you have no control.
Right, right. You see, I don't know how many people have the situation where they grew up in an environment that was so chaotic that they carried it with them into their, adult life, and without realizing that there was any really more effective strategy in coping with life besides the chaotic, And what you're talking about is this letting go thing. You throw that at somebody who's lived in chaos all their lives, they're going to go, "How the hell is that going to work?" I mean, how would you answer something like that? I mean, if you had a patient come in and say, "It's not going to work for me. I'm just not that way." I mean, could you possibly talk them down from that? I mean, would that take like many sessions or years of therapy?
Well, I would hope that they would stay in therapy long enough to find out that there are possibilities. And so I would point out to them how they're used to seeing things a certain way, and so it's understandable that they would feel helpless about it. And there's the possibility of instituting change if they realize that there's another way of looking at their situation that they're not familiar with. And that's what I can help them with.
Developing a strategy.
Looking at things from a different perspective, learning that they have the power not to be sort of controlled by their situations entirely is what they're used to from their history. If they grew up in a family or an environment that was chaotic and unpredictable, this naturally is what they're going to expect in the future. And I help them to see that it doesn't have to be that way. And so I help them to open their minds to possibilities that there's another way to address something, and that they do have alternatives to consider. So if they're willing to listen to that, and most of my patients are, they feel a sense of relief, and empowerment, that they don't have to be controlled by the circumstances in their lives that they feel seems as though there's no way out of.
So you've had a lot of success then with this idea of letting go in your Pontius Pilate dilemma, yes?
Yes, it's based on a very simple idea that we have the power to look at situations differently, and that includes especially our relationship with ourselves. And that's how I work with my patients, and it's been very effective. Yes. Yeah.
So the idea of self-love, have you ever approached that with your patients, of saying, love thyself first, and from that all things come together?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, self-love, self-acceptance, it's pretty much the same thing. So some people have difficulty with this issue of letting go. It's because that their relationship with themselves is too harsh, and they have difficulty in accepting that they don't have to be perfect, that they don't have to be able to control everything.
Self-esteem is an important factor.
Self-esteem, that's right. Or some people are very controlling, and they find that they can't control everything, and it allows them to alleviates the anxiety that they feel and the pressures that they burden themselves with unnecessarily. Yeah, but also, yes, self-esteem, sense of self-confidence also can be an issue.
What's your best advice for approaching this idea of letting go? The first steps. I mean, should one seek therapy, or should one support groups or anything like that?
Yeah, well, I don't know of any support groups per se. Certainly, I'm a psychologist in private practice, and my office is here in West Hartford Center. And you certainly can contact me if this is something that you're struggling with. My website is Robert Hamm with 2 M's, PhD.com. But I think that sometimes talking with friends and family sometimes helps, or reading my blog.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Read your blog. And you have a website, yes?
RobertHammPhD.com, yes.
And the phone number one more time is?
Phone number is area code 860-236-2131.
Great, great. So we're going to wrap it up for now, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Psychological Insights with Dr. Robert Hamm, who is a clinical psychologist in West Hartford. The number is on the screen, and the website is on the screen. Please check it out. It could be most informative and most helpful. And till our next show with the good doctor, I will say good day.